Okay, those who are joining us on the live stream, we are talking about language completeness and consistency for Wolfram Language, heading for version 12.1. And let's get started here. Okay. What is this can of worms? Partition padding with null lists when applied to a function.
Right. So I have a sort of explanation of how we got here. And sorry, Rob, but I think you just sort of screwed up a little bit here.
Is Rob here?
Yes, I'm here. And no, I don't think I screwed up.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a great start. Okay. Let's understand what the issue is.
Okay. So in order to do this, he changed the interpretation of the padding argument, which means that lists are now considered singletons when partitioning a non-list. So if you look at the example there, rather than cyclically padding with A and B, it's padding twice with, the list AB.
What was 301.604?
It was a case where the cyclical padding was not being done correctly, and I'm trying to remember the exact.
I'm pulling it up.
Well, it was a bug. Basically, can I explain what the logic behind the code is? So the cyclical padding code is if the head matches the expression, okay, it considers that as a cyclical thing, a list of things to be padded. So in list.
So let's just take range of 4 here. Okay, range of 4.
Right, there you go.
Just using that. Whereas in this case here, it's because the list doesn't agree in head with the F.
Exactly, Stephen.
It is treating that as a single single object, which it is then having to replicate twice.
Right. Exactly.
Correct.
Okay.
And in that second one, the partition range of 4, if you had F of A comma B, you would not expect it to be cyclical in the list.
So there, in that case, if that head is yet different again, it would repeat itself twice.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so it's splicing when the heads agree, but it is not splicing when the heads don't agree.
And that's the bug I fixed. It wasn't doing that properly before.
Okay.
Well, it's a change in behavior.
Okay, wait a second. So this is what it's doing. So
this is what it's doing now.
So the argument from Itai is that this should be different somehow, that output should be different there?
Yes. My argument is that what that output has been for the last, 12 versions or so, or the previous 11 versions was...
this thing, comma, AB, like that, right?
Yeah.
So it's basically list as a universal head.
Right, which is... if you look at like pad left and pad right, it doesn't care what the head is. It just...
what does pad left do? I mean, in the case where if we say pad left of range of 4, comma 10, comma, I don't know, is this the right syntax?
Yep.
Right, but now put F of AB, and it will not pad cyclically.
Yes, which is correct, and I maintain that partition should follow this. Right now, if you do F at the range of 4 in those two guys, you'll see that
that does it. That does it with breaking them apart, whereas this will do. So this is the big test. Drum roll. Oh, I see. Okay, so whatever this does has got to be consistent with what this does, right? So in this case, list is being treated as a universal head, so to speak. That makes sense?
Right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the pad one isn't trying to do any head matching, right?
No, but it is head matching. If I would
No,
yeah,
it's not.
look.
No, it's not, and I think that's a bug in PAD. But we can. I mean,
Oh
that's
gosh, I see. Look at that. That's obviously that's. What?
No, that is consistent with the documentation.
No, that's right. That's right. That's right. But then this. Oh, is because of the nature of that cyclicity.
Right. So
It
the
is doing the same
documentation
thing.
for left, and actually the documentation still for partition, although there it needs a couple of tweaks no matter what we decide today, state that if it's a list, it's interpreted cyclically, and if it's not a list, then it's treated as a singleton. And I think we can still do that.
You know, one day we should
still
consider
fixing-
having options as a way of specifying. I mean, I wonder whether we should have the possibility. Okay, I've got a radical idea for you guys that we actually have a partition in which we do this, and then we have an association with a bunch of named keys that allow you to say things like padding, arrow, whatever.
Sure, although that won't solve this problem.
I understand that. I understand that, but that has to do with partition understanding, so to speak. Do we think this is a good direction to try and do something like that? Or alternatively, to have some options as alternatives to the arguments here? Because, I mean, it is kind of, frustrating that every time you use this, you end up having to look up. If you're going to use a fourth argument situation, you have to go look it up.
Right.
Okay, wait a minute. I'm trying to get...
It's a different problem, but yes, I think that's a reasonable solution to it, Stephen.
Right.
I mean, I think the hard part will be coming up with the names of the left-hand sides.
Yes, and then we may... Okay, but anyway, let's pin that.
So we haven't even gotten to all the problems in my how we got here. So before we get distracted...
Oh, boy.
Let's... Right. Right, so in particular... That input below there, right? In previous versions, that would have been just f of 4 there without those empty lists.
What the heck are the empty lists doing? I mean, the empty lists...
Well, the default padding is empty list, and since he's now changed how he interprets list, it's sticking there.
All right, the default padding is open list. Really?
Yeah. Well, in the up to spec, right? So that table there of common setting for pad list is actually wrong, where it says default. It is default if you use a integer partition spec, but it is not cyclic if you use an up to.
Well, but you're saying that the obvious thing to do here would be to have these null lists just disappear, to have them be nothings.
Well, they can't be nothings. They would need to be f. They would need to be f of bracket.
Lowercase nothing.
Well, basically, Stephen, what happens in the code is when you have a head, the head with an empty argument, it turns itself into sequence internally.
That's horrifying. Okay, but that's what I would expect the output to be.
Right.
Yes.
Do you guys agree?
Yes.
And that's what it should be.
Okay.
Right. So
yeah, I think I've changed my opinion a bit. I mean, I think since Itai found this inconsistency with pad, and we have the universal lift thing, I can probably just revert back that change to the bug, and we're okay.
Right. So I've even produced this algorithm, which I think, unless somebody sees some problem with it. So let me
just review. What you're saying is, treat this as always a container that will break, so to speak. If it's a list, the individual elements are being applied cyclically.
Correct.
Okay. And if it's anything other than a list, even if... No, wait a minute. Let me go. No, wait a second. If it agrees in head,
no,
then the elements...
There's no head agreement in my proposal, because that wasn't the old behavior.
I see.
Yeah, so I think we just make list universal.
And then anything else is treated as a single item.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. And basically, with just a tiny bit of pre-processing, we don't even need to change the guts of partition. We just sort of internally change the head of the padding to match.
For example, grid will have issues like this about cyclicity and when is it cyclic versus when is it singleton elements.
Right, and grid always interprets list as a list and anything else as singleton.
But list as in a cyclic sequence.
Right.
Okay. All right. So what is your proposal here?
Right. So basically to restore the previous interpretation of the padding, and then I have here, and basically then I have a suggested algorithm. So basically, if the padding is a list and arg1 and the first argument isn't a list, then we just change the head to, the head of the first argument. So it's interpreted cyclically internally. So the internal code that wants it to matching heads, right? Basically, the problem is we had a mismatch between the outer interpretation and the internal code, and Rob sort of made the external interface match the internal code. And I'm here suggesting a simple pre-processing step that will.
Okay, but I don't think that's quite right, because in here, right, that would put in some f of something. So you don't want that. You don't want an inner f of x here, do you?
No. What it would do in that case, it would, instead of using list, it would use empty list. It would use f bracket, and then it would say, those should be sequences because of the f's. I think I'm confusing you by discussing.
No, it's okay. It doesn't matter. But I get I get the output you're saying.
Yes.
If the padding is not a list. Well, this is the implementation. I don't need to know this. This is
right.
It's going to be treated as a single.
Well, it may be. I'll work on something like that. It may be more subtle for the multi-dimensional pattern.
What if it's evaluated? What if it evaluates? I mean, then it matters whether something actually has the head applied to it or not. See what I'm saying? I'm skeptical about this detailed algorithm in the sense that I think it's very dangerous to just apply an arbitrary head, because the thing may not evaluate with 3 arguments, but it may evaluate with 1 argument.
Although I think you have that anyway. It would just evaluate after it exits partition. Oh, but you're saying it was already...
That in the intermediate stages, if you synthesize an f of x, it could blow up.
No, it's internally the command
I understand.
is just constructing the expressions and not evaluating.
Okay, I get it. Yeah. Okay, I think we've got a resolution here.
Okay, I just want to point a minor issue in the documentation then. So in that table about common settings for pad list, it says pad by treating list as cyclic default. That's only true if you're not using up to. If you're using up to, then it's uses an empty list for no padding by default. So we may.
Okay, so we'll need to add a note after that table for that.
Okay.
Okay. Can you just quickly show that bug number again? 301-604. Got it. Thanks.
Okay, onward. Next item.
Right. So this is a suggestion. We started to talk about it last time, but we didn't have. We didn't make very much progress, and so I thought. I mean, I'm personally opposed to this suggestion, but I guess I figured I would give other people the opportunity to weigh in. But here, I've identified sort of, a couple of obvious issues, and I'm not sure I see what the use case for this syntax is. Right. So what the suggested output in the suggestion is that output there.
Yeah, I see it. Which I think is fine, given that this operation is kind of obscure. I mean, I don't really see. The only thing I can imagine being useful, and by the way, somebody is not muted and is making some background noise here, but the only thing I can really see as being useful is something which is much more of a group by type operation. Because I think this idea of in the sequence of the association, chop off the first n elements. I mean, look, I could imagine partition of this comma 3 just gives the obvious thing with blocks of 3 from the association, with this output.
Right, but as we just discussed, a partition keeps the head. So by all rights, it should be an association, not a list.
No, that's crazy. Right. Well, that would have to be a special case because it can't keep the association head. It has no keys to use.
Right.
Well, do we think that... I think this function is not super useful. Anybody else want to comment on this? Jose, do you have any comments on this?
No, I agree with you that partition is not natural with associations.
All right. So why don't somebody can write the one-line function for the function repository, association partition, and this can be that function.
Okay.
And we'll see where it goes from there. If it becomes the most super popular function, then we'll think again.
Great. Okay. So can I go now then?
Yeah. I don't think.
Sure, unless you want to talk about fast multiple moments, but that's probably not the right meeting for that.
That'll be a fun meeting, but a different one. So
okay, all right.
Okay.
See you later.
Great. Bye bye.
Okay. Create file and truncate file.
Right. So there isn't a truncate file, and I'm not sure we need it. Constantine does point out an issue with create file. So sometimes you want to sort of have a well-known place. So you can do create file with an existing, with a specified head. And so, with a specified name. Yeah, that the first argument there. But the problem is, well, if that file already exists, then it will just yell at you. And so
I understand, as opposed to just truncating it to 0 size. Right. So the overwrite target thing, which is something from export and things like that, right?
I think it actually started with copy file, but yes, I think it's now in export, and it's in move file or rename file. And so
I don't see any reason it shouldn't be in create file. Seems like a reasonable idea to me.
Right. And so,
So now the next question is it useful to have a truncate file that truncates to a certain length?
I couldn't find any use for that. But
what is the Unix? Isn't there a Unix system command for that?
I don't think
truncate,
so.
Right? Except that works on streams. That's what I'm wondering. I'm thinking, why wouldn't we have this? And then realizing that I'm confusing files and streams.
What does it do on a stream?
It it truncates the streams. So the idea is you want to edit a file. Let's say you want to remove the last byte of a file. Then you can truncate to a different length from the current length, basically length,
what does
current
that
file size minus 1. Sorry?
What does that have to do with streams? That's for a file.
But I think it operates on a stream, right? I think you have to do a fopen, and then you f-truncate, passing in the pointer, the file asterisk pointer that you got from the fopen.
Right. So okay. No, there is a command line truncate in at least in.
Oh, that's true too. Yeah.
Here's one argument why we should have truncate file, but without specifying the. So if you use a file as a log file, and sometimes when you restart calculation, you want to truncate to 0 and start over. Because you
okay, so that's the system call, not the command line, and I think it right. So one of the slightly confusing things about truncate, right, is that it might actually increase the file if file isn't as long as.
What does it do, Phil? It can't be null bytes because those will be end of file markers.
Not necessarily, because you have to be able to write zeros into a file.
Yeah, it's extended. It's extended, and it basically creates a hole. So they're basically 0 bytes. So they're effectively 0 bytes.
Okay. Well, could whoever's typing please not put themselves on mute? Thanks. Okay, so the question here is: do we want something that is
Create file creates so you may want to truncate an open file.
Yeah, but where would you truncate? You truncate at the beginning or the end? I mean, I can imagine if you have a log file, you might just want to keep a running kind of journal thing of the last 500, it's like a tail dash, whatever it is.
Right, exactly. I mean, I never use truncate because I will either use head or tail depending on, and for log files, right, it's typically tail that I want.
Except if you have a long output, if you run your calculation again, you're not interested in the previous log. So you want to discard what's in the file and start over. That's why truncate is.
Right. So I tail it, and then I guess you potentially have overwriting issues.
Okay, but look, the question is, on the live stream, and Genesis is asking about touch file, but I think touch file we already have. What is it? It's file. What the heck is it actually?
I'm not sure we have it.
That is create file.
What's that?
Oh.
Or is that set file date?
I don't think we have touch file, but
I think set file date. I think it's the same thing as set file date. I think that's equivalent. I think set file date without a date is equivalent to touch.
Except that touch creates file if it's not there.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
It does. So it's a combination of create file and send file date.
Right. So basically, a create file with an overwrite target goes to true. Well, no, that wouldn't be a touch.
It's not the greatest naming that the word touch will create a file. I didn't even know that. In all these years, I didn't know that. Anyway, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was about to say something wrong, so I don't need to finish that sentence.
On this topic, though, because truncate, at least the stream version of it, is useful when you're working when you're doing random access writes, which is, I think, something we don't have. And so another way of saying that, correct me if I'm wrong, set stream position only works on input streams, not output streams, right? And so I think it could work on output streams as well.
Look, it was a project from the early 1990s to have read-write streams. We never did it. Do we care? I mean, generally in the... I don't even know whether the modern Unix world has changed, but back in the day, it used to be you'd open it for reading or you'd open it for writing. Can you now open it in some kind of read-write mode?
Yes, that's our...
What does it do semantically? I mean, if you read from the file, if you write it and then read it, what is it? What happens to the stream pointer?
Is there one pointer or two pointers? One for reading, one for writing?
No, it's one pointer, and so the point is you can open it in read, write, and append mode, for example, so that you didn't truncate the file when it was opened, and which means that its previous contents are still there, and then you can set the stream position anywhere you want and overwrite bytes, and then the stream position is the point immediately after the last write, and then if you want to, you can just start reading from there.
Yeah.
And if you literally opened an append mode so that you are writing to the end of the file, then trying to read will, of course, just give end of file.
I think this is a somewhat major project to overhaul stream code. I don't think it's the highest priority, and I think that's not what we should worry about right now.
I agree with that. And given that we haven't finished some basic things like, character encodings and input streams, I would choose that over a general...
So with respect to truncate file, is it something that's implementable in top level as a function repository function?
No, but it's quite easy to do on C level. It's no.
Yeah, but I mean, the question is, okay. I personally think we should skip this. I don't think it's that important.
Okay.
For right now, I don't see the.
If we're flooded with requests after this Twitch session, then we can reconsider.
Fine.
I would actually use it, but okay.
Well, okay. Look, if
I use log files for debugging quite often, and so.
Well, okay, then let's talk about the semantics of it. Okay. Because I don't think the name is right. I think the use case of interest would be, I mean, look, here's an example of something that would be useful. Being able to open a file with the statement, don't let this file ever be more than 10,000 bytes. Okay. So in other words, it's a limited size file. And as you add stuff to the end, it deletes stuff at the beginning. Am I making sense? So it's opened in append mode, but it is a fixed size file. So it doesn't, when you append stuff at the end, it deletes stuff at the beginning if it's too big.
It's like circular buffer.
Yes, for example. I mean, is that not what you would want for having a log file for debugging?
If it's literally a file, it seems like that would mean linear time every time you're writing something. Well, you have to modify every single byte in the file.
No, what you're describing is not what I want, because I don't know the size of the file. I just need a simple operation that when I start the calculations over, I need a clean log file. So
well, that's create the file with overwrite target. Yeah. That's something else.
Right.
So we're going to have create file with overwrite target.
Yes. So that will zero out the file. The question is, do you care about having a file that maintains a fixed size? You're claiming it's algorithmically hard to do if you want to, unless you say, well, don't worry about the size until after I've done it doesn't make sense to me. I don't think this does. I don't think this is something critical.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, and in fact, the way I think this is normally handled is by, date rotation, right? So every day, week, whatever, you copy it over to a new name and create the file.
Now, arguably, we should have some utilities for date rotation. I mean, that would be a nice thing. At least we could get a function repository function for doing that. Create a file corresponding to this date. Hardly the most complicated thing, but that might be a useful thing to have. Make sense?
Not sure.
Well, it doesn't matter. It's we can write it in 5 minutes or something. It's just a date string thing with a whatever. I think it'd be a useful thing for the function repository. It's not a built-in system function.
Right. I'm just saying that's right, not what people normally use for date rotation, right? They'll move, right? They'll have log file and then log file -1 and log file -2, and right, you either discard after so many logs, right, and then you just rename them, right? So when you do the rotation, the current one becomes -1, -1 becomes -2, etc.
Really?
Yep. Have you take a look in var, var log.
So you do that operation. So you take every function, you slide its name down.
Yep.
Weird.
Yeah. So if you do
all right, well, okay. So that's that. Fine. I don't need to do it, but I mean that might be a. Okay, fine. So there are function repository functions that might be useful. I think the thing about having a date, creating a directory, having something which has. I mean, I have many directories which are by month and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be having some utilities associated with that would be nice. In fact, I probably have those somewhere myself. Anyway, is Sushma on the call?
Yep.
Could be.
Yeah. Well, then that seems like it's a function repository thing. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let's move on to the next item. File permissions. Design of functions to check file permissions, which we do not have right now. We
do not have. We have information which gives some which I think it has the Unix permissions and.
So if I say information file, etc. password, for example.
Yep.
It has Unix permissions, but not permissions.
No W or R.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, right. So you have that string there, and you have the numeric, right? So you have the sort of symbolic and the numeric representations. But if you want to ask, can I write to this file, right? You'd have to take this string and somehow process it yourself.
Also on Windows, you don't have Unix permissions, and there are no permissions currently at all.
Oh, well, that's an unfortunate defect that we should probably...
Because there's no uniform way.
Okay, so this is set permissions for a cloud object. Generalizing that to a file seems like it's the first obvious thing to do. Right? And we've also got permissions. Let's see, that's an option. That's the option for a cloud object.
Right. I don't know how you query permissions.
You just say options. So, I mean, if I were to say cloud deploy, let's say, 1, 2, 3, then that will give me that. And if I say options of that, comma, permissions, that's what I get. Okay, now, if you ask the question, if you have a question about those permissions, like, is it writable? I mean, in other words, what policy, is this file writable by me, for example? Is this file writable by so-and-so? We do not have a language for querying that type of thing.
Right.
And that would be, certainly if you're doing systems programming, that would be the most important, well, it may be setting, but certainly querying, so if you can actually open, create that file, open that file, etc., is perhaps the most important thing.
Well, maybe. I mean, so this will be if the file is writable.
Right, then open it for writing. It's, for example. Or
and if it's not, give an error message or something.
Give an error message, find an alternate location.
Mapping permissions to all operating systems to Windows may be difficult because it has completely different system. But having a set of predicates like this, can I write to a file? That may work because we may implement it differently for different systems, but.
Right. So things like, I mean, we certainly have inside notebooks, we certainly have notions like editable, for example.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
But I don't quite understand how these would be. So, I mean.
So I think the sort of functions that, that Constantine would want would be something like check permissions or check permissions queue of, object, comma, reading or writing or executing. And then option, by default, it means, me, and you can give like group, world, or,
Okay, check permissions, object, comma, then the action.
And then possibly
by whom.
Right.
But I mean, it could also be something more like owner dash action.
Right.
But you see, this is kind of complicated because with the user metadata stuff of a cloud object, it could be that thing, you might say at 5 p.m. from, I don't know, Venezuela or something. I don't know what. And we have that ability to, from the user metadata restriction stuff, we have the ability to decide that based on time, geolocation, etc., right? So there's a little bit more to this because what you want to do is ask it.
Are Are you saying that you can change writable permissions based on time?
Yes, that's the idea. Right. So what it is in particular is this owner thing, right? What you do is you get to say this range of times, this set of geolocations has these permissions. Okay. Am I making sense? And a different time might have, for example, it might be writable from 9 to 5, but not at any other time. Okay. So you would have, instead of the owner there, you would say something like, time, I forget what it is, time range or something, arrow, and then 9 to 5, and then that arrow read write. And then, for example, the default case would be it's only readable, for example.
Right. So I guess I have sort of two responses to that. One is, well, maybe we need to separate check file permissions, which is, less complicated. Or, I mean, certainly I think the most important case is, can I now have this permission, right? What is, sir, and it may be that, right, it could be the sort of thing of, if we're going to do this for general objects, not all objects support all possible syntaxes. But certainly, can I now do read, write, or execute is an answerable question, and an important one for any sort of scripting.
Yes.
So maybe we need an opaque permissions object which will encapsulate for our various data like this. So we don't have to represent it in this particular form, but we can query it.
Well, that's a big deal, because the permission structure is pretty complicated. I don't even know whether it's I've forgotten whether it made it into 12 or whether it's coming subsequent to 12. Probably nobody in this meeting knows that. Does anybody know that?
I have not noticed any major updates to permissions for 12.
Look, start date, end date.
Okay.
Right.
Oh yeah, I remember this. Yeah.
Right, there we go. Geolocation, country, and so on. Boy, I don't think we mentioned this in the new in 12 stuff.
No, this only came
That's a bug.
when we were like 6 weeks into writing the marketing materials. So
okay, so by the way, that's a bug, and we should probably fix it. That the new in 12 should mention this.
Okay.
Rewriting history slightly. As in, we got to go back and okay. So, wow. Okay. All right. So this is kind of elaborate.
Mm-hmm.
But what it is doing is it's saying, given a user metadata string, can that person have this permission? And by the way, the permissions that they can have, there are various permissions here, like these ones, for instance. Now notice that those permissions map onto the individual within notebook, editable, selectable, and so on. This is a kind of complicated area. We're not going to get this resolved today, but I do think that the idea of a check permissions operating on an object, asking about an action is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the simple case of this, which is check permissions object, comma, write, for example, can I write this now, is pretty obvious and uncontroversial.
Yep.
Yes, still information of file, if you ask for permissions, what should it return? Because that would be the first argument for check permissions.
What? What are you talking about?
I think we took that out.
Yeah, that doesn't work because.
Well, okay. What do we have in there? What we have here is Unix permissions code, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Fine.
Which is that's a string, right?
Yes.
It is, yeah.
And Unix, right. So there was an idea that we should also have a permissions that gives the file permissions in the same form as this permissions option.
Seems sensible to me.
Probably makes sense. So, which would probably just be a list of rules, given that it's an option.
Yeah, it should be the right-hand side of the permissions option for this file.
Right. I don't know enough. I mean, Constantine, do you understand the Windows permission model?
The Windows inheritable permissions, it's more complicated.
Right. That much I knew. I think I think they have 4 like the old VMS, like read, write, create, execute,
That maybe it
or delete. I mean, delete, read, write, delete, and and I think it's also very heavily based on access control lists rather than groups. I think.
By the way, Vergero on our live stream is pointing out that that information of file does not show extended access control list permissions for Mac OS.
That too, yes. That is a part of permissions as well.
What does that look like? Do we have a symbolic representation of an access control list or not?
We do not.
No.
And how does it map into our own cloud object access control?
It probably doesn't.
Right, and you need right. So that is trying to remember how do you get that on? So I don't remember how you get it on Mac. So right, basically every file, certainly every platform, and possibly every file system has its own notion of access control lists. And so you need, but I think on Mac they look roughly like, this user gets these permissions in addition to the base ones, but you don't get them from LS. You need a separate command, which I don't remember at the moment.
No, okay. I thought it was a matter of adding something to the LS.
I don't know. I'm sure we can look that up. But
LS-LE.
Yep, thank you.
I don't know what any of these are. The LS-LE. Where do I see anything special about that?
You don't have
because there's nothing special about it. Let me see if I can figure out something that is special.
Try it on /library. /library. Might need a D also.
No, okay. There's something.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, logs can't be deleted.
Wow. So this is way more advanced than ext3 ACLs.
All right. So basic point here, we need to understand this better. But this will require a different set of people because it's the people who worked on cloud permissions, possibly also cell permissions.
Right.
Okay.
And we'll need platform experts, right? Because each platform.
Yes, that's correct. Okay. Well, let's get a meeting together about these and try and nail it. But I think the general direction we're going in is a check permissions type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, and there's a comment here from Mohammed on the live stream. Might be nice to have a way to elevate the permission of $system shell in commands like run process. Isn't that a different thing?
I'm sorry, I was momentarily distracted. What was the question?
Okay, so the issue is if you run run process with a system shell, there's a way. I mean, what you're effectively doing is a sudo there, aren't you? If you want to change the permissions level, isn't that what you do with sudo? Or am I totally confused?
Well, the point is that running system shell is not going to run things as sudo. If you want to change ownership of files, then you need to sudo. If you want to change permissions of files you own yourself, you don't need sudo. If you want to change permissions of other people's files, then you need sudo.
Right. The point this person is making on the live stream is that it would be nice to be able to do that, but we have a mechanism. What is our sudo mechanism? Because we have a remote secure shell, right? we've got SSH, which is
right, but that has nothing to do with sudo.
Okay. Okay, so walk me through. Okay, so I mean, in the generic use of, okay, so sudo would have to bring up an authentication dialog, wouldn't it?
Well, depends.
Absolutely.
And then it would do the same thing in recording the password in the system keychain so that you can do it again, right? Is that correct?
Possibly.
If you do multiple sudos, you don't have to type the password every time.
But that's the operating system that's doing that. And it only does that for a maximum of 5 minutes. And on some systems, it has to be in the same shell.
Okay. Okay.
Right. So,
but in principle, one could store the credentials in the system keychain using system credentials. Isn't that correct?
I don't. Well, probably.
In the system keychain, yeah.
Right. So then the possibility would be, if you want to do a sudo operation. So if you're saying run, and you say, do that with authentication arrow whatever, you could imagine doing that, or something like that.
Well, run maybe.
Well, isn't it the case that when you do the run, what is it? It's exec or something?
It's exec, which means it's going to run as binsh on Unix.
Yeah, and see, I would expect, maybe there are ways that I don't know or I'm not thinking of, but I would expect that what you actually need is to be able to upfront launch a process as root, which means that you have to have either launched Mathematica itself or your Wolfram Language engine as root, or we need to have a binary in the system with the set UID bit set, and that latter scares me.
I see what you're saying. Okay, well, there's all sorts of useful comments from Vajero on our live stream, basically saying this is incredibly complicated. This is I mean, we're clearly not going to make progress in this discussion. But okay, it's commenting on the whole SIP in macOS. I don't know what that is.
System integrity protection.
And that's one of the reasons why what I said scared me.
Okay. I'm saying it's not a keychain that determines the sudo thing, the timeout is set by, etc. Sudoers.
Right.
Okay, it should use PAM to authenticate. I don't know what that is. What is that?
That is the password authentication manager. It's a library. It's a system library that manages things like.
All right. So this is a big can of worms, and we're not going to solve it here. And right, it's pointing out that one doesn't use the system keychain. Well, wait a minute. PAM is a global way of setting authenticating passwords. What does that mean? Because I thought our plan was to use the system keychain to store a bunch of external authentication passwords. Is that not correct, Konstantin?
Yeah, it is.
Well, so now what is this comment about how
PAM?
Right. I think the point is that what Konstantin is talking about is completely orthogonal to the question of escalating privileges, and so so you can't use the same keychain that.
Okay, I understand. So there are three different things we're talking about here. We're talking about file permissions. We're talking about privileges for running a command on the local system, and we're talking about things like storing API credentials or SSH credentials, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it's that latter thing, that last thing, that we intend to use system credentials and the system keychain for. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. All right, let's move on. I think this is as far as we're going to get today on this, but let's come back and talk about a check permissions idea later. Okay, next item, filling. What the heck does this do? I mean, that attempts to be a filling between. So if I say plot sine x cosine x, well, and I need a tan x here, but then I say filling arrow. Well, actually, let's just say one arrow list 2.
You need an X range.
Thank you. Okay, that's rather magnificent. What the heck are those asymptotes doing? I never saw those asymptotes before.
I don't know. I haven't seen them. Is this a 12.0 or a master branch?
This is a 12.0.
Where are those coming from?
Let's just take a look.
I mean, they're coming from tangent.
Yeah, I understand. I know they're coming from tangent.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. That doesn't give them.
If you say filling goes to true...
Wait a minute. Are they something to do with filling?
That's what I'm wondering.
That is really weird. Oh my gosh. What
That's
the
a
heck
bug.
is that? You think that's a bug? What is it? What? First of all, why isn't there filling here? Where is the filling? I mean, if I say filling arrow axis, for example.
That'll work.
Okay, what does filling arrow true? What is filling arrow true supposed to do?
I don't know if it has a documented behavior. I don't.
Let's find out. Interesting.
It's probably trying to fill from 0, from the curve to the number true and failing, right? Is my guess.
No, I don't think so.
Well, let's take a look at what would happen if we just said filling arrow 0, for example. Filling arrow, let's say filling arrow 1. Okay, yeah, that's happy.
Try filling goes to A. Okay, so that's not the same thing as true. Okay, so then, yeah. I guess I shouldn't doubt you, Brett, when we're talking about viz functions.
Well, I mean, I think, you know.
Okay. Anyway,
when we're doing V6, we may have had something in mind for true, and it was just never completed or something. But I don't remember what it was.
Well, but what does filling arrow true generically do? So if I just say plot sine.
I mean, okay, right, okay.
To generate an error, because that's not clear.
What the heck?
Do it with 2 curves.
Okay,
there's a chance it's a shortcut for like 1 to 2, 2 to 3, or something like that.
Oh, so it is.
And what happens
if it's obscure?
So what's happening is probably doing it between. That's super confusing.
Well, try 3 curves with filling true. Let's see.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay.
Sine to x.
Okay, so what's that doing?
Yeah, so it's filling 1 to 2 and then 2 to 3, I think.
Okay. Fine. But
it's getting tripped up by tangent somehow.
It's getting tripped up by the asymptote. I mean, in other words, if and it seems like if I were to say something like tan x, let's say sec x, this is going to really confuse it because it's going to be, and let's say, well, cotan x. Oh God, I don't know what the heck it's doing now. It's rather pretty, but okay.
Right, but
what do we think?
It didn't trip it up entirely.
Right, just follow the coloring. Right, it's going from 1 to 2 and then from 2 to 3.
But it's correctly doing that, right? So there, it's correctly getting those. It's rather a nice plot.
Right, although I think you're still getting that really thin line at the asymptote.
You just can't tell because it's
blending in with the blue.
What do you mean? So if I were to say, for example, cotangent plus pi over 10, for example. What does that? Why is that not doing something? Sorry, I'm confused here. Oh, you think there's an asymptote line? Yes, there is. There's an asymptote line there. Mm-hmm. And if I say filling style
None.
arrow yellow. Oh, for goodness sake.
Try none.
Oh, look. You see that? See that?
No.
There's something crossing over there. Well, I can see it. It's
maybe just barely.
yeah, right. There's a little glitch there as it crosses over.
Yeah. Try filling style goes to none. Ooh.
What?
Or okay, try opacity of 0. I suppose that might also affect the asymptote.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
All right. Okay. All right. Let's go back to the original. So there's some bug here which has to be tracked down, or some misfeature. Okay. So let's talk about filling 1 arrow 2. What is that supposed to do, and why is that significant?
So that fills curve 1 to curve 2, and it probably helps if you look at the email thread, which I think Sushma.
Okay, this business. Okay, that was my plot.
Okay, what do grid lanes have to do with filling? I don't understand how that.
I mean, so what's happening here is the filling is completely obscuring the grid lines. And Stephen suggests that the grid lines should be in front, and I suggest that whatever's causing the filling to be opaque here was probably not intended.
Right.
Well, let's get a picture here. Let's get this picture. Actually, I had another objection. Okay, recently, that date list plot. I could not figure out how to get dots at every point in date list plot.
Really?
Well, let me show you something. Hold on 1 second here.
Like plot markers goes to automatic, probably.
Or I mean, mesh goes to true.
I tried mesh goes to true. It's not working, or maybe it's a bug. Maybe it's something else. Let me pull up something here. To pull up something nice and exotic. I have got. This is this crazy spacecraft that crashed on the moon last week. That
yes.
had some of our material on it, and I have the data. What's that? Bereshit, yes. And this is we can do the physics debugging here as well. I could not figure this out. This is the vertical speed as a function of time. And okay, so what I wanted to do here was to take the what I want to do is I've got data on the vertical speed as a function of time, okay? There we go. Right. Okay, so my goal here is to do a date list plot, which, date list plot of this, all right? So I say date list plot, that, and now what do you say? I mean, if I do this by default, it will join everything. Now I want to put if I say mesh arrow true, watch the badness that happens. That is not this mesh.
Oh, mesh all.
Ugh. How would I ever know that?
And you'd need percent. Well, now you need 3.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, I can put this data in there. Okay. Okay, if anybody can figure out why this thing is falling at 0.58 meters per second rather than lunar gravity, which is 1.66 meters per second squared, I don't know. I'm very confused. And it also appears to be violating Newton's first law, because I'm very confused by this. But that's a different issue. Okay, so here the issue is, let's say I have let's imagine, let's just take this as an example. I want to have a band of by the way, does it document this in date list plot? I mean, I certainly didn't. Let's just take a look here. The mesh arrow all, what it actually does. How many mesh points to draw on each line. And now if I go there, that's kind of super obscure, if I might say so.
I mean, it's in the examples, right? If you go to options, right, then I'm sure there will be Okay.
There isn't.
Today is a very bad day for me to be sure, apparently.
Yeah. Okay. So that needs to Brett. That's
Yep.
something to fix. Okay.
All right. So is there something we needed to address?
Yes. Okay. So hold on. The next issue is let's imagine here in this thing that I want to put in grid lines arrow true. Okay, that's hunky-dory. Now let's see what happens if I say grid lines to true and filling goes to okay, now that puts grid lines in on top of the filling.
They're behind the filling.
They're behind the filling, but there's an opacity, right? The default opacity is like 1/2 of the curve.
Right.
Okay. But
So I think what you were running into is you probably had something like filling style goes to light blue.
Yes. Okay, fine. Okay,
and then it was opaque.
Okay, but so what's your point here? So in the case here, let's imagine that I put the filling here in. Okay, hold on. Let's just do a simpler case here. So let's say plot sine x. Actually, what I want to do is this. I want to say plot. I'm trying to get two curves where I can fill between those curves, but I don't actually want the curves themselves, and then I want to put another curve on top.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to fill between. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. I want to say filling from curve 1 to curve 2. Right, that's going to give me that. Oh, I picked a particularly stupid example here. Let's go. Let's say 3 sine, 3 cosine. Okay, so it'll intersect like that. Okay, now I don't actually want to show those first two curves, so I want to say plot style arrow. Let's say none, red. Okay, dandy. Okay, so now that curve correctly goes on top of the filling. Or are you saying the filling is actually on top of the curve, but the curve? No, I don't believe that.
No. I mean, so
the curve is on top because it's the third curve, and
right. If you move your secant to the front, it might look different.
Okay, so let's try that. Okay, so now I want filling 2 to 3. And then this plot style red, none. Right? No. Okay, but now let me try adding to this grid lines. What?
I think you want automatic or.
But didn't it work in dateless plot?
It did, so something's wrong there. Okay, well that was working fine.
Right, now if you make plot style or filling style goes to, orange.
I see. Humph. Well, it's not obvious that this is wrong.
Right. And what will happen? What would happen is, the grid lines can either be all the way at the back or all the way at the front.
Yeah.
And I don't think you
honestly,
actually
this is
want
not obviously wrong. If this is documented somewhere, I don't think it's obviously wrong. Okay, so is there now an issue here? Is there some remaining issue, or does this resolve that issue?
I think that resolves it. The only question is, if you say filling style goes to lighter of orange, should it still have the default opacity? Or should it just be the lighter of orange?
What is the default opacity?
Like 0.4.
Okay, so if I were to say opacity here, 0.4, and then lighter of orange, then because of the bizarre rules of opacity, which don't care about order, is that not correct?
For the most part, no.
What does for the most part mean? Is there any case where they do care about
Well,
order?
if you have multiple things with opacity strictly between 0 and 1, right? The order in which you layered them could have an effect, especially in 3D. But
I see. All right, okay, this is a non-issue. So we have one mystery here with this filling true with asymptotes, which we should nail down.
Mm-hmm.
So, although it's not obvious it's bad behavior, but it's just a bit odd and not what we expected.
Right.
okay, so Stephen, Brett, and I are late for another meeting. So unless you think either of these is urgent, I would suggest we postpone them for another time.
All right. Well, let's just pre-meeting for this one for a second, and then we'll go. But
Okay.
This is about call out, highlighted, all the other things working in graphics. I am going to make a big push to have that happen, even though I know Brett thinks it's a bad idea so far. In other words, the notion that graphics is purely inert and can't have things that are labeled and call outed and so on, I think it's so confusing. And I just don't think, and I think it's super useful to have something which is both, graphics laid out and has a call out.
So the meeting that Emma emailed about last night is labeled and highlighted and.
All right, fine. So that's this item here.
No, I'm clarifying that's that
what
we're going to tackle all of that in one meeting.
Well, it's not all that. I mean, it's a big policy issue.
Right.
Okay, so are you, by the way, claiming that this just works in my example here? Are you claiming that this is a non-issue because this just works?
I mean, that one will just work. I mean, it'll take a little bit of time, but...
So you're saying the question is whether GeoSmooth histogram should respect country borders and so on.
Right. And I'm open to having something like, a special value like region function goes to string land or something.
Yes. I mean, it seems like that could be useful. I mean, I think that this is a bit goofy. This is showing, wow, it's locked up doing something here, but this is showing, that's showing the density of distinct. Oh, wow. Oh, that's super cool. Wowee.
Right. And I haven't looked to see what's going on with Italy at the moment. I'm not sure. It may be a plot point sampling issue or something.
Weird. I mean, what this is you take, I think, the centers of all historical countries and you superimpose them on top of each other and you ask where they are the most common. And the answer is that part of Southern Europe seems to be the one which is at least the center of the most weird stuff going on, for what it's worth. Okay, we have one last comment here from Vergero. About the sudo question. I'll just paste what they say in here, if I can. Which I may not be able to, but let's try it. This is about the sudo question. Sudo remembers what you've already put in your password and whether to prompt you again. Looks in var run sudo, which contains a list of each user and each TTY and the time they last authenticated.
Right. That's roughly that is a correct. I'm that sounds like my understanding of how sudo operates. So it knows where each TTY and if you have a timeout, that
that's actually fairly interesting workflow, which I could imagine us using for some of the cloud authentication stuff. I was not aware of that. I didn't know about that time. I mean, I've used sudo for, what is it now, 40 years, close to. but I never really noticed what I just noticed. Sometimes it asked me for my password, and sometimes it didn't. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, I wonder whether we could use that in that kind of idea in any of the cloud authentication stuff that we have. I mean, I suppose that there's similar mechanisms in OAuth, right? OAuth has timeouts also.
I was going to say, as well as I can tell, that's something like how the authentication for our webmail works.
Fair enough.
That it has like a 12-hour timeout or something, and
by the way,
per network or something.
I just want to point out, look at the edge of France and Spain here. Something presumably went wrong, right? Because this smooth histogram, whatever is the case, I mean, even if there was no great empire that launched in the in some some piece of Normandy up there, it's still the case that this coloration should extend to the edge of France.
Right. I mean, it may be that that's a resolution issue with the polygon for Europe, or that, I mean, a discretization thing on where the the points that define that gradient are.
I see what you're saying. Right. So because you haven't thought about region function in connection with the gradients for the smoothing for the histogram.
Well, I mean, it's just a normal region function thing, right? So it doesn't necessarily do.
But the region function should be
further adaptive subdivision.
I get it, but it should be a cookie cutter. It shouldn't allow anything outside of the region. Well, anyway,
right. I mean, but like that gap, connecting Italy to, was it
the
Croatia
Adriatic,
or whatever?
The Adriatic Bridge, we might call it.
Right.
Yes.
It's possible that the underlying points in the density plots are both on land.
I see.
Or, I mean, all that you have points that are on land, and nothing that's in the Adriatic there.
Right. Okay.
So
I see the easternmost tip of Spain is also missing. So maybe this was just written by a Catalan separatist.
Okay. That's and look what happened to Ukraine there. Look what happened to, what is that? That's Crimea, isn't it? Yes. Anyway, never mind. Let's not even go there.
Yeah. All
right. Okay. Good. All right. Let's wrap this up.
Okay.
Okay.
Live stream folk. Sushma, I think I'll send you. I saved this back to the original location, unless this is I think I need to send this to you.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.